Our guest today on Real Rover is Greg Sullivan. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, thank you. Great to speak to you today.
Now, I know that you are a researcher and an author who's lived in Japan a long time, and you coordinate JCETI, which is the Japan Center for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which, for those who don't know anything about SETI, it's a research organization currently working to expand awareness about positive, very important word, positive human futures, ET disclosures, and benevolent ET contact in Japan. And since 2010, you've been very active in Japan, leading all kinds of workshops and research trips. I know that you've taken Japanese people on research trips abroad. I know that you've been incredibly busy recently and that you are now in the northern part of Honshu, which most people listening will know nothing about, called Aomori. Tell us a little bit
Yes.
where you are and what you're doing there.
Yes. Thank you for the introduction. Aomori is amazing. It's the very tip of the main island of Japan, and it's got sort of two horned peninsulas here connected with a large, like a large, coastline in the middle. So it's like a U, like a large U. And then on both sides of that, just from the north of that is the northern island of Hokkaido. So it's quite a snowy area in the winter, and it's it's quite also well known for the Jomon, one of the ancient cultures here. And they've found tons of relics and artifacts and pottery from 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. So they have a lot of esoteric history. There's also a sort of a Christ Yeshua visitation kind of I don't know how you call it. They say that there's a grave of either or Jesus or one of his disciples is here as well. So there's a large history of mystery spots, and they have a place up here called Fear Mountain. We actually might pop up there today. It's called Omosorezan. I think they translate that as Fear Mountain, and it's one of the most famous ghost spots of all of Japan. So they have a long history of the yukai and the yokai, the astral, occult spirit world here up in Aomori. Yeah.
Yeah, well, many listeners are not familiar with Japan, and you've just kind of delineated some of the richness. There you go.
There's the map of the brochure here, yeah.
This is a part of Japan that has lots of legends. Some people will say superstitions and ghost stories, paranormal events. I think every country has them. Every culture has them. Many people may not know that there are medieval paintings in Japan which clearly depict what any modern viewer would label a UFO. They won't know about all of the very rich and diverse tradition of contact with so-called star people that exists here, as it does in every culture on Earth. But for those who are uninitiated into this rather esoteric realm of contact with what we're going to call extraterrestrial intelligence, tell us about your entry into this field.
Right. I'll just close with one other comment. The city I'm in here also has a very active military base. So every day we've got the F-16s flying around, and I was introduced to we're going to head over to the Aeronautics Museum today, who put on a screening of a film that we're helping to release here in Japan, the Unacknowledged documentary. And a Japanese pilot cooperated with some sort of Disclosure Japan efforts, and he gave us testimony and introduced us to pilots here in the Japanese Air Defense Force who have had witness accounts and have had their own contact accounts while in the cockpit. So yeah, it's quite an interesting area. My journey started, way back in grade school, reading all those legends, and I was into Norse mythology quite a bit. So I was an avid reader throughout my childhood days, voracious reader. And I also got into this quite early through a book someone in my dad's office wrote called The Occult Connection. It was a self-published work, and it went really deep into the entire Sumerian Anunnaki lineage and off-world connections, and also the all up into the modern military industrial complex and ET relations and all the it was an introduction. There was a fair bit of information that has been proven to be not true after the fact, but it was quite an eye-opener. And then in high school, another book that rocked my world was Gods of Eden by William Bramley. That's a sort of a keynote. That's sort of a touchstone for a lot of researchers. I think they reference that book a lot. And then my actual first contact experience was on a visit to the East City Ranch in Washington. I was living in Japan full time at the time, and I kind of the term, the Mount Adams, the word, and the fact that there was a lot of phenomenon happening there kind of went in one ear and sort of floated in the back of my mind there. And then just a couple months later, I was in the Portland area for a very good friend's wedding, and Google Map had just come out, and I just Googled, Mount Adams and realized it was not too far from the person's house I was staying at, another friend from my home area. And anyway, on my last night there before flying back to Japan, I was able to swing by for about a 3 or 4 hour visit, and that's when the sort of switch was turned on for this entire mission here. That's when it really kicked into high gear.
So you're a young man who is introduced to occult. For a lot of people, it may be interesting to note that occult simply means hidden.
Yes.
It simply means hidden. It's knowledge or information that's hidden from the general population. And this actually has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about today, because the key word is disclosure. To disclose means to reveal something that has previously been hidden. If it had never been hidden, there would be no reason to disclose it.
Exactly, yeah.
The presumption of disclosure is that something has been hidden for a long time. So for a complete newbie in the field of contact, they hear the word disclosure, and we've just explained what it means, and they're going to say, well, what's been hidden? What's been hidden? We know everything. We've got Google Maps, every single part of the world. We can walk up a street, I mean, I watched the movie Lion last night, and there's an Indian guy finds his way home, having got lost as a child, using Google Map. We can see everything. We got satellites in space. We got all kinds of technology. I mean, how in the hell can you hide anything? What needs to be disclosed?
Exactly. Yes. It's a huge story, and it's actually begins, thousands and thousands of years ago. But I guess in the modern era is the fact that there's been this 60 to 70 year cover up of all sorts of information. We were with one of the main staff of the Aeronautics Museum here last night having dinner, and the Brookings report came up where I was reminding him that the reason why JAXA, the Japan NASA, can't release the photos they took of the moon is because they have NASA breathing down their neck. And then the reason why NASA won't release anything is because they have this mandate where when they first started, that they said that the likelihood of finding extraterrestrial evidence is very high as we journey into space, but who's going to decide to release that is as us, and we don't have any responsibility to the public to release anything, immediately. The decision is completely up to this private entity. So that's a sort of a starting point as to where this cover-up and the actual.
That's a very good starting point, Greg. I'm familiar with the Brookings report, and again, for people who may not be familiar, NASA was founded on the premise that we are here to go out and find the possibility of extraterrestrial life. That's our mandate, basically. It's not like we're going to mess around and play in rockets and just zoom off nowhere for no purpose here. NASA is here to find extraterrestrial life. That's the whole bloody point, Jimmy, right? Let's get that clear before we go anywhere else. And then what they do is they get a world-class gathering of scholars, sociologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, physicists, human behavior people, and they say to them, okay, we need to create a report here based on the fact that we could find extraterrestrial life. Let's say we find it. What do you think, Dr. A, B, C, D, E, D? What will happen if we release this information to the public? And after a lot of work and a lot of writing, they came out with the Brookings report, which basically said, in a nutshell, we shouldn't tell them.
Yeah.
Because they'll freak out. It will cause religious wars. It will cause pandemonium. So we got a bunch of eggheads telling us how we're going to react.
Yeah. That was the cover story. Predictive programming.
That one report, right, Greg? That one report has just totally stopped any communication about extraterrestrial findings since NASA was founded. We need everybody to know this. I didn't make it up. You didn't make it up.
Yeah.
That's the story. That's the narrative we're dealing with. So please continue with what happens next with disclosure. How does this match with disclosure?
Yes, exactly. There's been this roadblock or sort of, that official policy throughout the Air Force and other related decisions that were made regarding the topic of releasing extraterrestrial evidence and or in interaction with the Earth or scientists or military assets, and so the whitewashing and the stonewalling and the complete 100% cover-up is sort of wearing thin, and we're at a point now where obviously the large turning point was the Disclosure Project done by Stephen Greer in 2001. That was sort of an enormous sea change where, as you're well aware, that after that point, the 80s and 90s sort of X-Files and all the shows that used to be on regarding the topic really changed dramatically into the whole, History Channel, Ancient Aliens type of a lot more of a more realistic angle on the topic, and a lot less of a scary take on it. So the fact that an NPO or a collective of independent activists, so, and you could say in a way, got together and were able to cause such an influential worldwide change was amazing. And that was, sort of stage one. And now we're heading into the era where more and more people are making contact of their own directly. So the whole disclosure issue is by no means completely based on the system we have now. The childhood's end, Arthur C. Clarke scenario of this awakening, consciousness revolution that will be, the revealing that we're not alone in the universe, that's going to change everything, every aspect of life on the face of Earth. So, I think that's a positive thing for 99.9% of the people, but we have that 1% that sort of has had this control matrix at their fingertips that are resistant to the change. So,
indeed, very resistant to change. And, I think when you work in a large company like NASA, which has checks and balances that have to be there for the public, you also have an inevitable hierarchy of control, like any organization, like any army, like any government. And it really comes down to one or two individuals who are in positions of great power and influence within that hierarchy, literally. I mean, we've just seen that in your country, in the United States. You know, Trump wants one guy to be in a certain position, and by God, he gets there, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it works. That's how the system works. So let's just go back to Dr. Stephen Greer. You have to open up the idea now with me of, and our listeners, of where he came from, how he started the Disclosure Project, and then we can come up to speed with where we are now.
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot of great research that's happened up after that and before that, but it was sort of there was a lot of I think the fact that it was a group effort, you had a lot of people trying to prove that, this through government documents, and then a lot of times these the counterintelligence operations, they always co-opt the same technique that the researchers use. So in our talk in Japanese there the other day, I mentioned it's like one of the main tactics they use is as soon as something real pops out like this, they then flood the market or flood the media with very similar copies, kind of like brand copies coming in from other parts of Asia into Japan. They say Gucci, it looks like a Gucci bag, but it's not. So that's happened with documents like the Majestic documents and other ways that people were trying to prove the issue. But the fact that all these people went on record on camera with their real names, and also the big thing was that through the Disclosure Project witness testimonies that a lot of the mechanisms of control and also the reasons for the cover-up were finally revealed. So that was really huge.
Oh, I'm interested in that. Tell us about that.
Well, of course, that the fact that for people now, it's become a lot. It's one of the most obvious points now, but the fact that the topic relates to high technology and advanced sciences, which were, the mechanisms of spacecraft are not using rocket fuel or gasoline at all, so gas motors, engines. So that connects into these advanced sciences and the zero-point energy, free energy devices, and basically a whole new macroeconomic system that would be possible once the presence of these technologies were revealed. So and then the fact that through events like Roswell and other crash events and actually a UFO spacecraft that were shot down and recovered, a lot of the material was recovered and studied. And so through reverse engineering, the scary thing was that these rogue black ops groups were getting enormous amounts of technology. And if you read the book The Day After Roswell by Philip Corso, he talks about how a lot of these projects went and patented some of the very profitable materials like that became Teflon and fiber optics, and that turned into unbelievable amounts of black budget funding for their secret operations. So it's a whole the cover-up has grown into this enormous 8-headed hydra of a monster, and so
yeah, this is another important point we should get clear with folks here, lest they think that this is a ridiculous conspiracy theory, that could never happen, and no, that's not how we operate. We go back to the example of Edison versus Tesla, and that's not a conspiracy theory, that is history. We have one man here whose scientific genius far surpasses the other, and his name is Nikola Tesla. And we've got a very business-oriented, politically well-backed-up guy, Mr. Edison. And one has a technology that is akin to free energy, and the other can make an awful lot of money selling electrical equipment to people using his system, right? And many people will not be aware of just how much coercion and really black money and threats were carried out against Nikola Tesla, who ended up a broken man as a result.
Yeah.
We can't just easily say, nah, it's a conspiracy theory. It happens all the time.
Yes.
All the time. So it should be no surprise to people that if we are suddenly gifted the potential of a technology that is so far ahead of anything we have imagined, and I know that you mentioned Teflon, there are many others that come to mind, but imagine you get your hands on that and you know how much that's worth, and you're a savvy businessman. Are you just going to turn around and to all the charity organizations around and say, hey, let's share it, babes? You're not going to do that, right?
No,
So
unfortunately not.
it's realistic. What you're saying is very realistic. They have an invested, strong reason for covering up their tracks because, and the many-headed hydra here is, once you've covered up this much and it starts pulling itself over, you gotta close this hole over here and then this one over here. Yeah. So it's like the circus game. You're trying to hit the coconut, but you got.
They're busy too. They're busy doing their own thing too. Yeah.
They're busy. So Stephen Greer, let's just get a bit more about Stephen Greer, who started the disclosure that resulted in all of these people coming out with witness testimony. Where was he coming from?
I know he was basically an emergency room doctor at that point. I know people should read the book A Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge for sure. That's really kind of ground zero for this disclosure movement. Basically, that's the story, and that's also in the movie Unacknowledged. That's out on Netflix and stuff on iTunes. So we've been screening that in Japan here and doing an official Japan version. But it's quite an amazing story. But really, it was an accident. It's and I think it's sort of definitely a soul contract thing for sure. So I talked to the founder of the International UFO Museum in Roswell, New Mexico, who said that he remembered when Dr. Greer first started coming to the conferences and stuff, and there was a time when he wasn't as well known as he is now. So it's been a crazy journey, and I actually, you go through some of these points in that book, and it's like you got it, and then your first reaction is you got to be kidding me, and then I've actually lived through very similar things here during our 8 years of work in Japan. So it is quite an amazingly deep rabbit hole. And how these rogue black ops groups have gotten so far ahead of the game that they're able to mimic actual ET phenomenon easily. So that's where we're jumping into. It's hard to keep it simple here, but I think that people can take a look at those materials and find out about the Disclosure Project. Definitely, it's all in English up on YouTube for free as well. But the reason why we've been reviewing that from the start is because in Japan, that information was really boycotted heavily throughout the publishing industry here. So it's sort of a step. It's sort of step one, square one in this new research, new UFO ascension research paradigm.
So again, to recap, it's a very deep rabbit hole. Viewers are encouraged and listeners are encouraged to read the books in question, because it would take us a whole day to go into the background of even some of the individuals who've come forward with information. Those who are already familiar with the older paradigm of UFO and extraterrestrial research back in the 50s and the 60s, names come up like Alan Hynek, who advised, he actually advised the Air Force and the U.S. government, and was a scientist. He was a skeptic, and he came out the other end like totally and utterly convinced that we are dealing with something very real. And in fact, for some listeners, it might be interesting to note that Holloman Air Force Base, which is in New Mexico, where recently the Sunspot Solar Observatory was closed down, actually happens to be the location where it is strongly rumored in the 1960s that there was actual physical contact between the U.S. government and a ship that did land. And as a reported film was taken, History Channel has gone over this. So, I think we're a bit farther on than just legend here, even in the old paradigm. That's the old paradigm. The old paradigm was they're coming in spaceships, they're either going to shake our hands or going to blow our heads off, and they're kind of scary, and we don't know who they are, and all of that. And then we had, like you said, the X-Files, we had the Fringe, we had all kinds, and of course we had the brilliant movie Contact. That was one of the most brilliant creations ever, suggesting that if we do make contact, they're not going to come up in spacesuits. They're going to appear as embodied parts of our memory, which might be our father or our mother. And they said to Jodie Foster, who says to them, "You're not real," says to the guy who looks like our father, "You're not real."
Yeah.
We've been doing it this way like for billions of years, as if to say, we know how hard it is for you poor creatures to even begin to understand the level of civilization that we're coming from and what we can do with our minds, right? And that kind of opened the door, but a lot of people didn't get it. They wanted guys in spacesuits. And now we're at a very different place. Where
the propaganda and the imaging of all these, the old images are, they're still hanging tough in a lot of people's minds. I agree. Yeah, we need to change that.
We need to change that, and but it is happening. We're seeing a lot more films suggesting that the mind is a much mightier creation than we may have imagined. I mean, we're already talking about controlling machines directly with our minds. But let me just get back to, you said that the Black Ops people now have such sophisticated technology that they can fake a UFO sighting, which then they will later refute and say, see, it was technologically created by us. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that was a great point. And recently in the film Unacknowledged, as well as other lectures, a lot of the sightings that we all grew up reading about, especially like the Hudson Valley flap, and that's near where I grew up in New York State. A lot of these, the classic UFO is known to be this mechanical device that has panels and rivets and windows, but actually a real spaceship is way more advanced than that. And so they've had this whole Psyops that's gone down, where that they have their advanced spacecraft that started with the Nazi Bell during World War II, and all those scientists they brought over with paperclip went on to continue that aeronautics development in the Southwest desert, New Mexico and Nevada. And so then they would do these so-called select interfaces with the public, where they would fake the sighting. And so people are saying, we saw this UFO that was actually a military ship. It didn't have any propellers. It didn't make any sound. They were using advanced anti-gravity technology. But that created this enormous mythology, the UFO mythology, that went out through all the books and workshops and lectures throughout the 80s and 90s. And all the while, there was this huge agenda behind that, which was preparing for this potential scenario of a false alien invasion. So that's sort of the key theme in this new film, Unacknowledged, which is a total omnibus of all the UFO research up until now and what was really behind it all. So you definitely recommend that to anyone to start. And
so you're saying here, Greg, that a vast majority of the sightings that were reported by individuals were actually engineered by
Yes.
black ops groups with a specific agenda in place.
Yes.
Uh,
Piggyback on that,
and
yes.
what would you say that specific agenda is, tersely?
Well, it's the fact that they want to militarize the relationship. You know, the fact that they've been ignoring the real potential of peaceful contact, and then exploiting the potential for using it as a warmongering technique, the ultimate unseen enemy.
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing with it. What's the difference? There's a big part of the lecture I do as well that says, what's the difference between half disclosure and full disclosure, and also anti-disclosure, you know? So, and the half disclosure is that where you have this scenario where they say the AETs are real, but they're a threat. So the whole agenda is that with the whole Star Wars program in the 80s and the SDI Defense Initiative, they want to use this and spin it into to help create more work and more enormously expensive projects for the military-industrial complex, especially the private, the private companies that build weapons and weapon systems. So I got a taste of that world and the compartmentalization right before I started JSETI in the East Coast of the U.S., selling scientific equipment to those kind of companies, and it was quite an interesting experience. But anyway, the agenda would be, so they have the control where they would then be able to, let's say, shoot something like maybe, I don't know whether it would be an actual weapon or some sort of beam weapon, and if they needed to, they could destroy a couple cars or a couple buildings and make it look like it was War of the Worlds, you know. So the fact that people...
If I may interject here with something that will kind of corroborate that. I went to study remote viewing in 1997 at the Farsight Remote Viewing Institute, which was the first open to the public remote viewing school after the declassification of remote viewing. And so my class had a very eclectic range of people, including a NASA engineer, an obviously very brilliant man. And so I got to chatting with him over the 6 days that we were practicing and studying remote viewing. And he said, oh yeah, we've got space platforms now. This is 97, with plasma beam weapons right on them, ready to use at any time. And I pressed him a bit further, and very characteristically, he said, that's as much as I can tell you, but it's okay to tell you that, right? So he's got no reason to be, generating a whole crock of shit. If he's a NASA engineer, and I'm sure he was, some unknown guy from Japan, and he's got no reason to make this up. We just happened to hit it off after a session, and he let it out, right? So 20 years ago, we got plasma weaponry aboard some kind of platform above our planet. Yeah, that's for sure. And God knows what kind of level they're at now with that. So it makes sense that the military-industrial complex, which makes nearly all of its money from weapons, the arms business is the biggest business on earth. It makes every bit of sense that now they're running out of self-created terrorists to extinguish. The ultimate terrorist, the ultimate ninja terrorist, my God, is going to be the alien. Yes. It's a Valerian. He can turn into me or you.
The Venetian. Yeah, the person in the Disclosure Project who brought that out was Carol Rosin, and I recently was in touch with her. She's going to do a quick talk for us for the bonus footage of our DVD of that film. But her testimony is one of the most important that was actually given to her by the Nazi scientist Werner von Braun, who helped develop the V-2 rocket and
really
with NASA in the early days. So yeah, he was aware of this agenda, at least existing from the 70s. So that's this whole PSYOP has been in the works for years, and what's the only thing that can challenge that is having your own contact experience. So when you do, and now this whole thing, they've called that the ARV, by the way. There's some vocabulary we haven't covered. They have the flying, they call, one of them is called the Astra, like the triangle.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff, a lot of the ships and the UFO photos you see in kind of tabloidy magazines they're actually rolling out one different model or another. And the triangle is called, one of them is called the TR-3B. And they have been filmed with night vision at times by people in let's say, Las Vegas or other parts of the U.S. And there's a video of one that was over Paris. I don't know how authentic that one is, but these ARV, alien reproduction vehicles, are reverse engineered spacecraft. They're not at the level, of course, as the real ET ones, but they are, since they have this propaganda feed that's been put into the public's mind all throughout all sorts of media throughout the world, that people automatically assume they've already made the link that type of ship is an ET spacecraft.
Mm-hmm.
And then when those kind of things start using those plasma weapons or doing aggressive maneuvers and right in front of you, then it's set match.
It's a done deal. They're aliens, of course. They're aliens. Yeah. Well, that's an important point. Again, one word we need to clear with listeners is Psyops, because it may be new to people. What is a Psyop?
I know we're going to be subtitling this in Japanese, so for the English folks watching, we're actually having to rewind and pull these topics down to some of the beginner levels. But yeah, the Psyops, psychological operations, is a form of it's sort of I guess you could say, a military tactic of brainwashing, and it's a form of advanced propaganda and using advanced psychology, which the Nazis were pros at, of course. Yeah. And basically it's adjusting people's impression of information that before they can actually get the truth of it, they are inserting different impressions and false realities, helping people make misleading into wrong assumptions and wrong conclusions. So with the topic,
give us an example of a brilliant psyop.
9/11.
Oh, I was going to say the same thing.
I'm from New York, and I was born in New Jersey, right where you were talking about Edison. I was born in New Jersey, right across from Manhattan, and New York's my home, my baby, my home city. But I was in that.
Looks like we got, sorry, we had an unstable internet connection there for a second. How did you, as a New Yorker, see what we both clearly understand as a psyop, 9/11? How did you see that, and how quickly did you see it?
I saw through it within a week. I used to live downtown I was living right near Wall Street in my third year of college at New York University. And so I had friends still living in the neighborhood. So I was down there in my old neighborhood just a week after it happened, with all the smoke and the molten lava from the nanothermite still burning in a pile. Basically the 9/11 is this whole thing where it's this dramatic terrorism where these enormous towers, something you'd never think you'd see happened. And basically that was, your logic goes offline.
That's a good line. That's a good line. Your logic goes offline because of the shock and trauma effect. Yeah.
Yeah, the dials slam, and the same thing with the UFO phenomenon and UFO sightings. It's this very high energy experience, so that floods the perception, and your ability to reason with logic gets put off to the side, put on hold. So that was a very well orchestrated. And then, as people start to realize that what happened with Washington, D.C., where was the crash plane in Pennsylvania, all these what happened with WTC-7, the demolition, all these enormous holes in the story. So I actually had I was working in the World Trade Center. In my lead up to doing J-Steady, I had an interesting experience with synchronicity at the site as well, where I had some signs come through. I was doing a job, a sound engineer job there at the Winter Garden, which is right at the foot of the towers where they collapsed. And it was, I think, it was in 2009, I believe. And I was there, and I was at a convenience store in the little deli, and the National Enquirer tabloid headline said "human sacrifice ritual."
Oh,
That was one of them. And then this researcher in Denmark had just come out with the nanothermite theory, and that's a whole other story. But I was standing listening to a guide talking about the disaster, and I was really looking at this information very deeply. And I said, I looked at him in front of this group and said, how can you reiterate this nonsense to these people? And we had this little exchange, and it was so funny. He called the group. He said, would the people from Denmark come over here? And I was just looking at this report that had come out the day before from a Danish researcher who had the orange flakes of the nanothermite from the steel beams that he had revealed, and the dust. So it was like all these keywords popping in. And they were from Denmark, Idaho, or Denmark, Michigan. So it was just, I was laughing to myself there.
Oh, yeah, these synchronicities do tend to occur like that. Yeah, well,
yes.
If for those of us who, for lack of a better word, for those of us who have awoken from the days of having our logical systems put offline by a series of traumatic informational events that paralyze our ability, many people's ability, to think rationally and logically, unless people out there still believe this absolute fiasco was perpetrated by terrorists. Ask yourself two simple questions. The plane didn't go into the tower, it went through it at a corner, right?
Right.
At a corner. So you got, and most of the explosion happened outside of the building. Before we get into thermal and anything else, you can see that the plane exploded outside of the building, not inside of the building.
Yes. Yeah.
Steel melts at over 1,000 degrees, and gasoline burns at like 800. And there's no building in history, up until that point, no building in history has ever collapsed to the ground due to burning, ever. Right?
Yes.
So you just need to think about that. It took me about 2 days, not a week. And I was lecturing to Japanese about this crock of armadillo turds, and they were all like, oh, this guy's out of his mind. And then we have all of the rumor mill and conspiracy theories start. But logic was offline, completely offline. Yeah. That was a brilliant psyop. And that's the point we need to get to. If you can do that, if you can pull that off and get nearly everybody to believe that, nonsense, it's not even physics, it's nonsense, then of course you can generate alien agendas. Of course you can generate spacecraft sightings. It's it's easy, right?
Especially with no reference, with no real scientific base of evidence, and very few people with the experience. The other key word we need to tie with the psyop real quick as a closing point is hypnosis. Yeah. It's a form of hypnosis. And I remember they would repeat that shot close up with the boom, the tower's coming down. They had that on repeat on the news, and I would be at work, and our studio owner at the time had a giant TV in their house, and I was working at a recording studio, and I just, every time they had that on for days, for weeks after that, they would just keep repeating that one clip where the building 2 came down, the collapse, the moment of collapse,
Yeah, there's some noise outside my window because of dismantling a house, and let's say that they wanted to do it quickly in the old way, which is to just set a bunch of bombs around it, and then they blast it, and the house falls down. And let's say you've got 100 tons of material falls to the ground after the house has been destroyed, well, that pile is going to be about 8 feet high, right?
Yeah.
And when the 2 towers went down, the amount of material in those towers should have left a pile of rubble at least 10 times higher than the abysmally pathetic amount of stuff that was left at the bottom. And the whole world went, nothing wrong with that. It just disappeared, for Christ's sake. It just disappeared. So that kind of technology can vaporize millions of tons. Nobody thinks about it. Nobody questions it. It's now, I prophesized at the time, Greg, if we don't wake up within 6 months of this happening, give it 10 years, and it'll be a complete done deal. It'll be unchallengeable, you know?
Yeah.
And it's unchallenged. So what you're saying about Psyops is not science fiction.
Quick little point here. I live in Fukuoka Prefecture, which is where the right now where I live is the original target of the Nagasaki A-bomb was in Kokura. That's where I live right now, and there's a huge Mitsubishi Steelworks there, and I know a manager there. Those people that plant made the beams of WTC 1 and 2.
Oh,
they were made in Kyushu, Japan, and they said our beams would never bend or break like that, or melt. They knew it wasn't true at all. The Steelworks people, I've met them.
Oh, that's a precious piece of information. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, steel beams do not just snap like toothpicks. It doesn't happen. So logic has gone offline through this fantastic program of hypnotic suggestion.
Bamboozled in
the best sense of the word. So here you are, and here's is Dr. Greer and a worldwide group of people who are coming out with a different narrative, a kind of antidote to the hypnosis. It's an antidote to hypnosis, which depends not on the information about ET, but it depends much more on you making contact with ET. Yeah. So let's get into that now. What is that all about?
Right. Well, the two really go hand in hand. In order to make, I think that it's possible for anyone to make benevolent, contact. But what helps is that to clear the decks as to really realizing what has been this non-contact or this non-disclosure up until now. So understanding the cover-up is a really big sort of basic thing for people. And then really what happened was with my journey was that I went to, James Gilland. He has this amazing ranch in Washington there called ESETI. And I thought I would never, I was thinking to myself, I'd love to go back there someday. And then what happened was the craft and these sightings continued after I was back in Japan. I was seeing them in the skies of Tokyo. And it was almost like reminding me the feeling, of wonder that I experienced at the ESETI ranch. They were saying, don't forget. So every once in a while, as I drifted back into everyday life, and that experience was with me, but was not, everyday, in my everyday consciousness. I was then kind of being tapped and initiated gradually by these benevolent beings. So, and then in the end, in the year or two leading up to this project starting in 2010 officially in Japan, I was back at home. I moved home to New York for about a year and a half, and I had heard the other interviews from Dr. Greer talking about their C5 contact events and with their group CSETI, and the amazing results they were having. And I ended up joining the group, and they had a members-only training manual at that point, which I got, and I was reading it, and just everything in there was check as far as my experience personally as well. So then I realized that that my mission was here in Japan, and I had first experienced this world while living in Japan, and really had my sort of consciousness renaissance while living in Japan here. So I wanted to share this with the people there. I felt this really strong desire that my calling was here. So in 2010, I brought the C5 initiative here I went back to Japan with a laser pointer, the contact training manual, and a radar detector. and that was it. And these kind of CSETI contact materials, and then developed a program for the Japanese from there. But anyway, it's the premise is that people are making contact all over the world, and we're finally getting past all the middlemen, the gurus, the kind of over the clouds contactee type of types that really there's no need for any sort of middleman in this at all, which is an amazing thing to realize. So and you can take it at your own pace too. So really that CE5 really broke in 2013 when the film Sirius came out, and that was really a big worldwide phenomenon. And people now have this ET Contact app. We released our own Japanese version last year. So it's getting easier and easier to try it out for size. Contact for the masses is here. So that's amazing. And we've had we've actually replicated the experiences of these groups here as an independent research group. We're in no way officially affiliated with any other group. So we've built JSETI with our 4,000 plus participants over 8 years, and we've had experiences that corroborate other groups across the world as far as non-threatening, non-violent, non-scary, amazing, inspirational, very fun, and ecstatic, contact experiences, throughout all over.
That's very important, that these adjectives that you brought up, fun, ecstatic, obviously people are having a good time. And it's important also that you mentioned that the hierarchical structure of, even 30 years ago, the UFO contactee was venerated, semi-divine being. I have contacted the Pleiadians.
Yes. Yeah.
You need me.
Yeah. Well, let's go into that briefly, because that's a very interesting thing, is that when you look at religions like even Mormonism or some of the religions we mentioned yesterday on the phone here in Japan, a lot of these, they start with the same type of experience. Like, it's interesting. They have this experience with something great, and then they become the head of their own group. And it's sort of like, every shaman, as you know, has the decision to make once they have a certain degree of power, that are you going to use that for the benefit of others or for your own benefit, the service to self or the service to others route. So that's the ultimate choice. And unfortunately, the fans of this topic of the world have been at the privy of the negative shamans and the people, when you do an ayahuasca journey. I've never done that, but I know that there's the shamans that.
As soon as you mentioned that word, you froze on screen. As soon as you mentioned ayahuasca, you froze.
Wow.
But that's interesting timing, because people may be interested in looking at Pablo Aimar's beautifully well done art book called Ayahuasca Visions. And Pablo Aimar was one such shaman that you brought up. And he was able to recall his visionary states so well that he could paint them. Wow. And I would say in at least 50% of his extraordinary, beautiful, colorful paintings, in at least 50% of those, you have what would be decided by most people, extraterrestrial beings, UFOs. Right. Other worlds, right? So you have to ask yourself, why would an uneducated Peruvian shaman and half of his tribe all be seeing Venusians and ships and all manner of extraterrestrial activity if this was merely brain generated, as the scientists would say? It's not real. It's what we would call a hallucination, right? So these points you bring up are very important. The guy who started the Mormons, his visionary experience, anybody could see that was extraterrestrial contact. Yeah. He was actually given objects of extraterrestrial origin, the Urim and the Thummim, I think they were called. And now look at where Mormonism is. No negative printout here on Mormonism, good on you, go for it. But we don't need intermediaries. That's what you're saying. We can contact the others.
Yes. There's a key, the key themes that we've seen in the past throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s with these groups that I know you're aware of, especially also here in Japan, I can confirm, is that with the things like the Adamski movement, they took on this mythology that became quasi-religious, and the infighting, and then when these groups started to do their sky watches, you had a lot of faking of evidence too, which was just such a horrible, one of the worst heinous crimes of a researcher that's unfortunately been rife through this field. And the competition game would begin, where you have someone would take an amazing photo, and then the jealousy factor kicked in, and they would start to use that for power, and people with that kind of evidence have a certain power over others to have no experience with it, and that again can be easily abused even within the lower ranks of those groups. So thank goodness now we've gotten to the point where all these groups doing the CE5 and their own contact around the world, they're their own research generating machine. They're their own evidence generating machine, not in the fact that they're making evidence, of course, and falsifying, in the sense that they're doing their own field work and collecting their own data. So there's no embargo, there's no limit on who owns what, and that becomes it switches from a competitive playing field into a collaborative one very quickly, and that is another amazing shift that ECETI and CSETI both help facilitate. Very important.
It's almost in a sense it's a bit like the history of Gnosticism. In the 1st and 2nd century, the Gnostics were in real competition with the founding members of what we now know as the Christian religion, and they made it very clear that direct contact with the divine was the way to go, but it required a lot of discipline and self-sacrifice and practice and corroboration and gathering your own evidence and making sure that you weren't in contact with some flaky apparition. That was knowing yourself directly, knowing your own divinity directly. But they were very quickly wiped out by I think it's a mode of human consciousness which would prefer the route of less challenge, which is the route of, we just listen to the leader. Now he knows, and we've proven that he knows. And of course, he's gathered the evidence to prove that he knows. And so we're, in a sense here, though, what we're talking about.
The Pied Piper effect.
The Pied Piper effect, yeah. But many people will not be aware that it is actually through ET contact that Gnosticism, in a sense, a really advanced form of Gnostic understanding, is reoccurring on this planet, where any man, woman, or child can actually go out with you. And we do need people like you with at least the manual.
Yeah, navigators.
You need navigators. I mean, some people are lucky; they just it happens to them. But then they will either want to forget it, or it will be denied, or they'll go into an episode of mental problems because what they've seen just destroys the systems, right? What you're doing is you're offering navigation, manuals, and hopefully this won't turn into a religion 20 years from now, and you'll be sitting up on the throne.
I promise. You have my word.
I'll call you on that.
You call me on. You can call me on at that point. Yeah. When you see my face on mug cups around Japan, yeah. When I have 2 offices in Gotanda, yeah. Like these other groups.
Yeah, exactly. So let's now shift, because we're in the last third of the interview now. Let's shift to what we've got people out here listening and viewing this who go, well, maybe this is not completely crazy.
Can I just sorry, can I just follow up? We were talking on the phone offline yesterday, and I just want to tie in that point with this changing of the guard. Can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
When we experienced that with Japan, I know you've seen the sort of the old crew, the old boys network, who, and I'm confirming to you that it's not really, yeah, well, it's the fact that a lot of these people, their careers have been built upon this old information, which in our field, unfortunately, was largely man-made. So that's really, there's a strong resistance to this sort of level of open source contact happening. So that's an ongoing challenge for us right now.
Oh, that again is a very important point. Let me just give you an example from my own experience.
Yeah.
Nearly every physicist on the planet makes his or her living based on fundamental information about the universe. And part of that information is every single one of them will say the sun generates energy through nuclear fusion at the center of the star. The entire worlds are based on that one piece of information. And the way science should work is it goes through a process of falsification. Nobody can actually prove, and nobody has ever or ever will prove, that nuclear fusion is actually what powers the sun and all other stars. It is a theory. If that theory is falsified once, just once, and it's replicated through experimentation, that's the end of the theory, and that's the end of your career, Jimmy. You spent 20 years, and it's not because you, Jimmy, are a bad guy. You, Jimmy, just fell for an explanation and didn't check it out enough. And that's your fault, Jimmy. All right? That's your fault. So I interviewed Walt Thornhill, who has for 30 years been talking about the electric universe, the plasma universe, an entirely different view of the universe. And at the beginning of our interview, I read some of what people had written about him on Wikipedia: pseudo-science, hallucinatory, incredible derogatory stuff written about a real gentleman who's done his work and done his research, and he has a very, very good grasp of it. So lest our listeners think this is all flaky stuff, it's real. Careers will be demolished overnight when they realize you guys were venerating an American-made machine, which you thought was from Venus, and we just proved it's actually from Los Alamos.
Yes.
Where did that leave your career, Jim? And of course, Jim's going to come at you with a lance.
No more TV appearances for you. Yeah, no more TV shows. No more books. Yeah, I mean, well, unfortunately, there's this the people who have and then my last comment will be that in Japan, these people have deliberately ignored this information. Deliberately. That's a betrayal of all their fans and all the people of Japan who could have benefited from this. The scene is 10 to 15 years behind. It's getting better now, but when we started, there was a 10 to 15 year gap in kind of average understanding of this knowledge, because these people, not only were they blocked from the mass media who wouldn't have broadcast it, but even in their private lectures and their private schools, they deliberately ignored that, and because that was it's exactly like you said, their stance up until then would have been eradicated.
Yeah, exactly. And any true researcher, and a true researcher is a rare, really a rare bird. A true researcher will have the courage to say everything I've said until now was wrong.
Right. Yep. Or I don't. Or I don't know. Yeah. Or I don't know.
Or I don't know. And I think I've come maybe across 2.5 guys like that in my entire life.
Yeah, sad.
That's how hard it is. That's how hard you get so invested in it. So let's move in now to Japan. And I know that you're in a very unusual position. Here you are, an American, speaks fluent Japanese, teaching people about something very arcane and wonderful and incredible. What kind of people are coming to be trained with you in contact, and how have they changed?
Thank you. Excellent question. Yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and I can delineate these people into several different groups. You know, the early phases was it's always had a mixture of you know, the folks here are so open to the information when they actually take the initiative to come. They're really open to anything. So it's been just hundreds and hundreds of pure-hearted, beautiful souls. A large portion in the first wave, I noticed that especially in the Tokyo area, there were a handful of people that were coming just because it was something new. You know, the sort of sometimes you would call them the spiritual obake. You know, they go to any and everything. They have enough time and money to go anywhere. So we met all those kind of people. But then there's the people who came out of the Adamski and the old guard and who have upgraded, and they want the truth. They want real contact. So they're ready to let go of their old experience, and they're ready to take on this new level of direct contact too. So that we've been with them. The other level of people I met in the first 3 years were my soul family. Amazing reunions, one after the other. People in the event, or oftentimes people who held the events. As you know, in Japan, there's a very active community of people inviting teachers to go to their hometown. So we often get to travel to very minor areas, rural areas, which are in our contact work. We're not in the city. You know, we're often way out in the countryside. So in places like Toyama or Okinawa or other places, I've met my spiritual family and soul past life connections too. And then we have the Japanese contactees, the Japanese star people in the Indigo community we support. The young people, children, families who haven't had a place to share their experience before. So we have this community effect, and we've connected several people who want to get involved we've been a bridge for people who just didn't know about each other in their prefecture, or we've also liaised with groups that were at odds and smoothed those out. So through this work, we've had so many amazing interactions on the earth side and the human side of things as well.
Oh, that's really encouraging to go out as you are now to what we call the boondocks of Japan, places where nobody would normally go who's a lecturer. Those, in fact, are the places where one often finds the jewels.
Yes.
Where one finds
I can remember being in Toyama, which I know, Toyama is the Colorado of Japan. It has the Northern Alps, as you know. It's like the Rocky, you know, the Canadian Rockies or the Rockies of Japan. And that's where I had one of my past lives as a Japanese person. And I remember the woman who invited me was, they had a grape farm, a huge grape farm. And they had a house on a part of the orchard that was kind of a staff house. And they had me stay there, and I had the whole house to myself, and that's where the events were held, and we went to a nearby ski field to do the contact work. But I remember in the second time I went there, the first time was so amazing that we immediately scheduled the next event, which often happens. And in the second event, that woman and the people who actually hosted me, they couldn't make it until like maybe 2 hours after we started. And I was sitting there as all these people, word had spread, and people just kept pouring into this house. And I'm sitting here thinking, this is, you know, the grassroots effort at its peak. And I'm thinking, this is my entire international experience since age 16 at its absolute pinnacle. I mean, I was just floored. It was so inspiring to be in this straw mat tatami room with the people who didn't know each other, and I had never met them before, but we were all gathering for this, you know, let's do contact, you know. So I was that's
another way to understand contact too, is that because you are not Japanese, And because you're not part of the hierarchical structure, which people need to understand who are outside of Japan listening to this, it's incredibly hierarchical. So the people in the UFO community don't talk to people, for example, in the yoga community, because they've got their own hierarchical pyramids there. They may meet and politely exchange greetings, but it's never like we're all equal under the sun. And the only way that can really happen, in my experience, is for an outsider to come in and be the catalyst so that everybody can start hugging each other and go, what difference does it make, right?
Yeah.
Which is an important part of your work, I believe, that you allow that interaction to happen, and that cannot be underestimated by anybody. You can't buy it, sell it, or package it, or learn it, or go to university. You have to actually be in the field.
Very important insight.
What you're doing right now,
Yeah, that's, you and I share that unique angle, and that's what obviously the guides have kind of triangulated for us to do, to get this word and get the experience out to as many people as possible. So just as you said, I mean, we've interacted with so many different types of other spiritual groups, and that's been a miracle. That's been just a one amazing collaboration after another. So exactly, I have no attachments to any kind of societal hierarchy here where I can't do this, or I can't go there, or I can't interact with this group. There's absolutely zero restriction as far as that goes. So that has been probably one of the strongest points. So that is a very insightful
it's hard for people to understand how important it is. I mean, already in our talk today, you have mentioned that at the beginning of this, you talked to pilots, and basically the Japanese Self-Defense Air Force are here talking to, a tall Westerner who speaks the language. For a meeting like that to happen between two Japanese and to get that information would be almost impossible to conceive. It would be, you'd have to be in the same category box to even get into the room to talk to a guy like that. People like you or I can walk into any room, anywhere in Japan and talk to anybody.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because it's culturally accepted that, that's okay. And we must never abuse this. And we must never take it for granted. We're extremely fortunate that we get the love and support of so many Japanese people. But we got to give them something worthwhile in return. And you're doing that. You're doing that. And
thank you for those very insightful words. Thank you.
It's I mean, not just anybody can do this, and there are very few actually doing it. So let's move on to now where you're going to go over the next year. Let's say you've taken it to this level. You've experienced a great deal. We didn't go into too much detail, but you've had a lot of resistance, a lot of hassle, a lot of people trying to put you down or denigrate your work. You've overcome that. You're still working through it. But now we're ready for the next stage of contact in Japan. So tell us what that will look like, Greg.
Well, even this conversation with you, and all these, all the veterans in a good way who have an enormous influence. And as of last year, we've been meeting more and more of the sort of the good, the positive vanguard, the positive old guard, so to speak, the wise elders, so that you and Sonia and others who have kind of created the spiritual field in Japan from the get-go. So that's been amazing to collaborate with partners like that. And then for us, and we're always striving to get more out as far as, we have we've been guided to less is more in terms of media and blog posts and stuff. So I've been really kind of holding back on a lot of their reports and actual research results, but we're now running up to package that in several different formats that it's time for the actual research results as we approach our 10th year here. So we've laid the foundation through 3 films, Sirius, E-Cities, Contact Has Begun, and now this new unacknowledged film. But now, after that, I'm pretty much going to leave the Western information to be for a while, and we're focusing fully on our domestic Japan work. So that's going to be coming out in English as well, more and more. We've had absolutely world-class contact happening here. I call it the front lines of ascension because, look, we've had Fukushima, and then, as you and I know, all of the actual esoteric roots. Japan is in one of the highest positions as far as the esoteric kind of layout goes on the earth as well. So all that stuff has never been put out in English. So how that relates to contact will be part of it. And I think we're going to be going more and more in the route of the online community and e-learning as well. So we want to keep people informed and support our community as they grow into contact and their own contact experience and beyond. So we take that as we're guided, and I've got, as I just calculated, a friend, a woman who helps with our website. Her brother has a publishing company, so we're gonna be doing a couple children's books. We have a lot of artists, so our team is growing exponentially. So I've got about 7 books in the pipeline right now that I could make at any time. So we'll see how, in what order they come down in. This book, where is it? Right here. The last one I did, the last book I did, I called it Hologram Mind. One second here.
Great title.
Yeah.
Mind.
Internet Dimensional Mind. I had it here a minute ago. Oh, it's I've got it here. And this was actually kind of, I wouldn't say a channel, but the actual process of it was, the great thing about books in Japan, as you know, is that they're spoken. A lot of the Japanese authors speak them. So I was in I made the outline for this book in Okinawa, and every night the ships were waking me up in the middle of the night saying, come outside, and I would go out and have a sighting. And then it snowed in our town, and I was in the bathtub for 2 days, just going through my outline and speaking into the recorder, and that became this book. And it was the fastest and easiest one yet, and it was the best one yet. So using that same sort of multidimensional speed, I'm hoping to rock out several more books in the next year or so.
Wonderful. You're in the bathtub connecting. You called them the ships. In the very ancient days in Greece, they would have called that your daemon, your genius, that which comes from outside to contact you. Because in the old days, nobody ever thought that these brilliant ideas and books and strategies came from themselves. They realized clearly that it was coming from somewhere else.
They were correct, yeah.
Which is the holographic mind. And, everywhere, all time, in every instant, in every point of time is holography. So, contact in a very, very broad understanding involves everything and everybody. And it's not just about a specific bunch of aliens trying to come and teach us something. It's about perhaps us becoming aware of the holographic nature of reality, which is why your book is so well named. And whatever order they come in and how they get downloaded will be revealed. For those of our listeners who could be in any part of the world, who want to, they're listening and they go, maybe these guys are actually a little bit for real. Maybe I should try and contact. And we've suggested that they maybe don't read the old paradigm stuff about us and them and the Venusians and the Syrians or whatever. And notice that during our discussion, we've never, ever used any terminology like being contacted by the doodah-doodahs. There. We deliberately avoided that because that itself is the old paradigm.
Yes.
That is.
Thank you. We're definitely going to be having we've added a search engine to a content page on our website. So we're now making an English version of that. So we've got a ton of information ready to share. So just at www.jceti.org, jceti.org is the site, and we're going to have a part of the header banner that will say an English page here, so people can click into that and they'll see my English interviews and English videos. And this video will of course be up there as well. So I should have hopefully have we've also created a training series of videos where people can actually do the simulation where we show ground light phenomenon and how these ships appear in the sky. So that's sort of a first of its kind tool that we've had since 2011 here actually. So we've got an English version of that ready to come out, and we'll share some of that as far as that can help out with people in their own field work at home.
Good. And I think in ending, we need to leave a caveat with people to be very careful of Black Ops, Psyops information, which does tend to be specific about we contacted this group and they taught us that, and then they warped us to this planet and we went to this secret base and then we figured out this secret technology, and one wonders, what is the heart? What is the heart behind such information? You have to ask yourself this question. What is the heart? Does it make people feel joy? Is it expansive? Does it make them feel more creative, more loving? Because if it doesn't, chuck it in the trash, baby. That's not going to help anybody.
I often say the same thing and to people here. Definitely, it's how does it make you feel like you can do that? Because a lot of that doesn't. It's it's just a self-aggrandizing, self-appointed gurus and self-appointed the hierarchy.
You can make contact. In fact, the very meaning of the word contact requires at least two intelligent entities, and one of them has got to be you. So, so we'll close today after this. First of, I hope we'll continue interviews. We're going to hopefully get a decent video of this, and we'll have subtitles in Japanese. For the English listeners, they won't need that. Anybody else wants to subtitle in your own language, go ahead. This has been an enlightening talk between Real Rover and Gregory Sullivan, and we are much obliged for your time and wish you all the best in Aomori with today's events and everywhere else that you go in Japan. May you be protected at all times.
Thank you, Ehan. Thank you very much.
Okay,
cheers
bye now.
Let's meet again in Kobe there.
We will. Bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.